Hi and welcome back to the next video. This is video 21 and this time we are dealing with some endpoints and guards in NestJS. In specific, we do some refactoring, and for our blog feature module in our API we add an update and a delete endpoint, and we add a new guard where we check if the user that is trying to make this request, for example the update or the delete request, we check if the user is actually the author of this block entry that he's trying to update or that he's trying to delete. So you're only able to do something like this if you provide a JWT and you're actually the user that made this block entry. Our video structure is as always: first we look at our video outcome, then we will write a user story for this or read the user story for this outcome, and then we implement it and close the story. Let's have a quick look at the video outcome. So at first, the deleting a user is now protected by just being able to execute it by an admin, so a user with the role admin. The second thing that we did was, if you want to update a block entry, you have to provide a JWT token and you have to be the user that is the author of this block entry. And the same goes for deleting a block entry. You're only allowed to do this if you are the author, so this is all protected. So we can just make it for the block entry 16. We have a JWT where we are the creator, so we updated the title to update the title. And if we now get us a JWT from another user that is not the author of the block entry, we can try to update again. So we provide our JWT. Then we go into our body and say we wanted to update the title to not working. We make it send. Then we should forbidden because we are not having the valid JWT. But if we log in as the user that is owning or that is the author of this block entry, then we can copy this here. We give him the Spira token. We make another send request, and now you see we have not working. Or let's call it updated title again. And so if we make this request again, you can see title is updated again. Everything works. Let's have a quick look at the next story. Here we are on video 21 and we want to do some refactoring, and for our blog module we want to implement the updateOne and deleteOne functions or endpoints, and we want to add a UserIsAuthor Guard. So if we want to update a block entry, we want to check if the user that is sending the request is also the author of this block entry, and the same for delete, so that you can not delete it or update it if you are not the author. So the story is, as a technical lead, I want that a user is able to update his or her block entries. Also, there should be done some refactoring for the JWT strategy request user.user. You know, there was some mistakes, so that I always have to go against user.user instead of just user. So we can simplify this, and so the acceptance criteria are: we want to refactor our JWT strategy, we want to have a new endpoint updateOne and the service, of course, and the same for the endpoint deleteOne and for the service, and we want to have our new guard UserIsAuthor Guard. So let's go into our code. So you can see here we are on branch develop, and so we can make a new feature branch with git-flow and just say git-flow feature start. And then we name the branch, so we are here in video 21, and so this will create a new branch based on develop. So now we can start by making our first changes to the code. So the first thing that we want to change is, we are having here in our auth module our guards and our JWT strategy, and you can see it here. We are always having user and adding then the payload.user, and this makes some issues, or it makes it heavier, because you see here we have always against request.user.user, and we want to skip this here. So what we can do here is we can just use the spread operator and make payload.user, and then change it here to payload or request.user, and the same where we use it everywhere else. So the same as here, and I think we have it here in our blog.controller also, user.user. And we have the same in our user controller, so we could just search for user.user here and just delete it here, and so this should work now and should be fine. Then the next thing that we can refactor is our deleteOne here. has no guards, so you can delete just any user you want without even having a JWT provided or something like this. So what we want to add is the JWT Guard. So we can make it the same as we used before. So we use the guards, we use our JWT Guard that we wrote, and of course also our roles guard, so that we can check if the user that is trying to delete is an administrator. So, because in my opinion, you should only be able to delete a user completely if you have the admin rights, and even this is debatable. So we call here for user role .admin. And so what this does is, if you make a request against an user ID to delete him, to delete the user, it first checks if you have a JWT, and then it uses the JWT strategy and adds the user to the request that it extracted from the JWT. And then as a next point, it checks if the user has the role admin. So this here should not be the user is user. Where are we? Here the roles guard, and it then checks if this user has the role admin, and you can see it here. It's very simple. It's going against the roles that we added there. Let's see, where are we? That we added here. The has roles annotation that we made custom. You can see it here. That are the roles as metadata. And then we get this roles here as an array. And if there are no roles, then we just return true, because then you don't need to check it. But if there are rules, then we get the user from the database and check if he has the role that we that we provided with the has role annotation. And if this is the case, then he has the permission, and if not, then it's always false. So we can always check if we delete if the user has a role. So we can just make an example. So we can npm run start dev. We can now try to delete a user. So we can go here into our database, we select all our users, and we see that, for example, my user 7 that I'm always using is an administrator, but my user here is just a user. So if I use this email to generate something, so we can want to delete one, so we have to look for a user. For example, we want to delete user 14. Then we make a delete request against the user 14, and this should not work because we are not having a JWT. But if we first log in and we don't use my normal one, but we go for the tester email, then we are having the JWT from a user that is just having the role user. And then we can give him the bearer token here. We can send, and then it should also say forbidden because we are not having the role admin. But if we now go with our user that is having the role administrator against this and provide this here and send, then you see we have affected, so we have deleted this user. So remember, this was ID 14, this was here. If I now rerun this query, then we see there is no user with 14, he is completely deleted. So this now works fine, so we can close this up a bit so we make it a bit easier to see. And then we can start with going into our blog feature. So here we know our endpoints, we have find blog entries, find one, create, and the next ones that we want to do is, or that we want to do are the updateOne and deleteOne. So we can call updateOne. And this is also an observable, and the return type is the blog entry, and then we return something, and this is just our blog service .updateOne, and here we provide him the ID that we want to update and the payload of the new or of the update, what should be updated from the block entry. So just to make it a little bit easier, we will switch a little bit, so we can say here updateOne, we are having an ID number and we have a block entry as inputs, and they also return an observable from type block entry, and this is just return something, so we can make this later, but then we don't have this error here. And now we need the ID and the block entry. So here we want to make the update request, so this is like a put request against our API, and we will need the ID for this to work. So this is a normal parameter, so we go for param from nest.js and go for ID. And this is the ID from the type number. And the second thing that we want to get is what changes, so what should be updated in this block entry. So we just go against our body, and this is the block entry from the type block entry. And another thing that we want to do is here is we want to use some guards, and this is the JWT auth guard. And the next we want to write our own guard for this, because not everyone should be able to update the block entry, but just the one who wrote it, so the author. So we can make a new folder in our block feature module and call it guards. And there we can make our author guard. And so we can just say, we can call it UserIsAuthor.guard.ts. And then we can say we want to export class, so we can just stop this here. So we can say export class UserIsAuthor Guard, and we implement the can activate. And this, of course, is an injectable. So we need two things in our constructor. This is the first thing is our user service. And the second thing is our blog service. And then we are just having one thing, and this is called can activate, because we implemented this. And here we have to return something with a Boolean value, so we return an observable from the type Boolean. And we need to get all our things that we need is we need to get the execution context from NestJS, so that we can extract the complete request from it. So we can go const request is the context dot switch to HTTP, and then we extract the request from this. And then we have our params. They are just in our request object here, dot params. And then we can, for example, get our block entry ID, which is from type number, and this is just number params.id. And we have our normal user, and this is, as always, the request.user, as we have seen before, where we fixed this. And of course we have to import all this stuff. User. And now we can do something. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to use our user service and find the user that is making the request. So we are first going through our JWT guard, then we extract there the user and add it to our request. So this is the user here. And now we just want to find our user by ID. So this is better because now we know exactly what role does he has at this moment in the database. If we just go for the thing that is provided in the JWT, it could be that the JWT is like 3 days old or something and that the role has changed. So then we will pipe the outcome and do something with it. Because you want to cancel the ongoing observable, we use switch map, and as a return we get a user object. And so we have to import a switch map also. And then we just make a new observable, and here we go for the blog service. We go also for the find one, and now we find our blog entry by the ID that we provided in the parameters. And then we pipe this request, and then we do something again with it. And here we go for the blog entry that we get from the find one. This is of type blog entry. And then we do the same stuff that we did in our guard here. UserIsAuthor Guard. Something similar. So we say permission is false, and if our user ID from the user that we got is the same than the author ID from the blog entry, then we return true. So we can very easily say at first let has permission is always set to false. And then we can say if our user.id, so from this user here, you see it, this is highlighted, is the same than our blog entry that we got in return here, the author object and the ID of the author, then we just return has permission, or then we set permission to true, and then we can just return as always the user and the has permission. Then this error should, what did I do wrong? Unknown types of observable boolean. Let's see. We have find one. We pipe it. We make a switch map. Pipe it also. Blog entry. Are we missing map? Yes, we're missing map. So now you see, we extract from our request, we add with our JWT strategy the user to the request from the JWT token. Then we have the user here, we have our blog entry ID from our parameters. So for example, something like similar like here. Then we get our user object here. And then we find by our parameter from the blog entry and check if the user ID that we got is the same than the ID from the author from the blog entry, and then we set permission to true. And if this is not resolving, then the permission is false and you don't get access to update or delete this. So now what we can do is we can simply implement this guard by just setting it here, UserIsAuthor Guard. And then we can implement our logic in our service for this. And then we can check if everything is working fine in Postman. So we have just called here updateOne. So we want to return from and make the blog repository .update. This is normally not an observable, we transfer it to an observable. And so we are searching for the blog entry with an ID, and then we want to update all the things that are provided in our blog entry, so in our body from our request. And then we pipe this outcome and make a switch map. Probably can even make a tab, I think. This would make more sense. And then we can just call this find one and go for VID. And maybe a little explanation what we are doing here. What are we doing wrong? Let's go with switch map. Here, so we update with our block repository update. This needs an ID of the block entry that you want to update and all the properties from this block entry that we want to change or want to update. And then it does this, but this returns not a block entry in return. So again, we cancel this if it's done, and we make the find one here and just find by ID and return this. So if we can try this now, if we have here our create block entry, JWT needed, or we get all block entries, let's just check this. Of course, we have to start our API. Then we should see some entries from my user number 7. You know, this user. We now hit the API. You see we have the ID 15 created by user ID 7 and the ID 16 also. So what we could do now is we could make a new request. Against this we will make a put request, and against the block entry with the ID 15. And then we try just to update something. So we make a raw and make a JSON. Then we add a JSON, and let's just say we want to update the title. And we say updated title. You remember here in block 15, the title is test title 1, so it should be updated then. But now we are not providing any JWT, so this should not go through. And so if we, for example, now get us a JWT from not the user 7, but the user 14, get the JWT, authorization, bearer token, add this. It should also be forbidden, exactly because we are the wrong user. But if we get the JWT from our user with the ID 7, provide this here in our bearer token, make the request, then you see now we have the updated title. So this works fine and as expected, so we can go to the next endpoint, and this will be the deleteOne. So we can just say deleteOne, and there we want to return this blog.service.deleteOne, and this goes by the ID. This is also an observable, let's say of type any. This should be a delete request. We go again against the parameter ID that we provide as parameter. So we can just go here for param, we go for ID, and the ID is from type number. Then we can go into our blog service, make the deleteOne for an ID. We make it an observable, and we return from this.block repository.delete, and there we go, just give him the ID. So obviously not everyone should be able to delete something, but the same as update, only the author should be able to delete a block entry. So we use the same guard. And now we can check this also here. So you remember, we can just make and copy the same request here, make a delete request. We can try to delete with the number 15. This is not working. If we get our JWT from another user, then this should also not work. But if we get JWT from our user with the ID 7, so the one that created this post, then we have affected one row, deleted it. So this works fine, and if we now get the block entries, the ID 15 is gone. So this should be all, I think. Let's check if we implemented all our features. So we have refactored our JWT strategy. We have a new updateOne endpoint. We have a new deleteOne endpoint. And we have, of course, our new guard, UserIsAuthor Guard. So we can save this and move this to done. Then we can go into here. Right, first save all our requests. So this here is, we can save as. We can save this to our YouTube blog and say update block entry protected by JWT only, and can add some description. Only the author can update a block entry. We save this to the block, and the same we can do to our delete request. So we want to save it here. We say delete block entry, JWT protected. Only the author of a block entry can delete the block entry. We save this. We can also save this deleteOne here for the user, because we changed it to now having bearer token. And so we can now export everything and add to our repository. And now we can go here, we say git add -upper-A, git commit -m. We are now in video 21, and the commit message could be added small refactoring of JWT strategy at UserIsAuthor Guard to and deleteOne and updateOne for block entry feature module. Then we can push it. And then we can just merge it back into our branch develop. So we can just say git-flow feature finish. And then we can push the develop branch also to our remote repository. So you now see it's deleted. We are back on develop. We push develop branch, so this should be fine.